Imagine that you have an extraordinary empire and you're seen as the GOAT. Not only in the hip hop industry, but the music world follows everything that you do. You're seen as the guy that gave us Notorious Big, Mary J. Blige, and you cultivated Usher into the superstar that he is today. Everything you touch turns into gold. And you're in your 50s now, you've got a beautiful family, and you've almost reached billionaire status. You wouldn't do anything that would take all of that away, would you?
Brand new information from music producer Little Rod Jones, going into even more detail about his accusations against Sean P.Diddy Combs in a civil lawsuit, and he's spilling even more of Diddy's alleged secret.
The irony is this man claims to want to help the community. He's always doing these posts about, I want to help the community. Meanwhile, in his own household, he's beating the shit out of women. But you're such a good guy, aren't you? These fuckers, they always do that outwardly. They're always pretending to be a model citizen. Let me be absolutely clear. I did not do any of the awful things being alleged. I will fight for my name, my family, and for the truth.
The psychological games that you playing as a nigga that ain't right. Outside of all of that, outside of what we saw, outside of the probably hundreds of cases that we don't know about because you done got some NDAs popping or cut some deals with some people prior to.
Or threatened.
Anything that you've ever heard now is just on the table. You lying sack of shit.
I guess you wonder what's going to happen next, Diddy. I know.
Well, the life of Sean John Combs has been nothing short of extraordinary. And people are kind of torn about the man today because he was the person that was carrying the torch, not only for black musicians or entertainers, but for business moguls and for anybody that's in the urban sector. He kind of became the personification of cool. And then on the other hand, he had one major problem. He was addicted to power. And for decades, we heard the stories, we saw him on TV, and he was kind of unapologetic about it. So when we heard the stories, we forgave him over and over again. And he was telling us, it was right there, that to get to the level of success that he's on, yes, you have to work hard, but you have to also be ruthless, you know. But he took it a step too far. We all saw it. It wasn't just about monetary value and hard work. We saw that he actually thinks that you can be ruthless when it comes to people as well. And this time, there were literally no fancy clothes to hide behind. There was no shiny bling to distract us. There were no fancy dance moves. It was all there in the video, and we saw it. The real human being behind the facade. So how did it come to this? Let's start from the beginning. Sean John Combs was born on the 4th of November 1969 in Harlem, New York. He was born right at the back end of the American civil rights movements, and Harlem was the scene of a series of protests in the 60s, and rightfully so. I mean, the whole country had endured the racism and the violence and the social injustice, but Harlem was the place that had a very large black community, so it's one of the places that suffered the most. There was a heck of a lot of poverty, and this dated back to the Great Depression when a lot of Harlemites were out of work and the employment prospects just stayed poor for decades. And the city was plagued with very low quality housing. And the neighborhood tenants just wanted the city to force landlords to bring this housing up to code and take action against things like, rats and roaches and give people heat during winter, things like that. The education system was terrible. 75% of Harlem students tested under grade levels in reading skills, and 80% tested under grade levels in maths. And the crime. As we all know, Harlem was a stronghold for organized crime during this time, starting with the Sicilian Mafia in the 1930s. By 1960, many of the white people had left, and much of the black middle class had also left. The city was mainly now inhabited by poor, less skilled people of color, which led to the control of organized crime shifting from the Italian syndicates to local black, Puerto Rican, and Cuban groups. The drug addiction rate in Harlem at this time, it was 10 times higher than the New York City average and 12 times higher than the United States as a whole. Half of the children in Harlem grew up with one parent or none, and this lack of supervision led to juvenile delinquency. So the people from Harlem were stuck in this vicious cycle, and things didn't really improve for the city until the 1990s. So that's the backdrop of Sean's life, A lot of people in his neighborhood grew up under really terrible circumstances, but not for the Combses, apparently. They had a relatively normal household. His father, Melvin Earl Combs, was described as a family man, an educated man who served for the U.S. Air Force. His mother, Janice Combs, was a teacher's assistant, and she was also a model for various brands. And apart from Sean, they had one other child, Keisha Combs. And I know, right? I didn't know he had a sibling. So she's extremely private about her life. If you look her up, she's like, I think, a casting director and an advocate for social justice. So, yeah, Keisha. So they apparently had a really lush lifestyle. And I think the family even had a Mercedes Benz, and they were always wearing like the nicest clothes. They were that family, the trendy family of the neighborhood. And Melvin apparently had a limousine business that would bring in enough money to allow them to have disposable income. And what I really found interesting about all of this was that Melvin and Janice had this vision for the family. Like, they always thought that this wasn't the life for them. That was the life for them, And they even got Sean in a Baskin-Robbins commercial at the age of 2, which is a nice little cool fact to add in there for you guys. So we have a normal family whose roots stemmed from an unstable environment, yes, but they were able to really sort of keep their eye on the prize and survive. But that was until 1972. When Sean was just 3 years old, his father, Melvin, tragically passed away. So Sean grew up thinking that his father in a car accident, and he would later find out that this wasn't true. In fact, it was very far from the truth, but we'll get back to that later. And of course, Sean doesn't have a lot of memories of his dad. He does have one very vague memory of him sort of playing with his father, and his father was kind of tossing him up like a baby. So Janice has to now kind of reevaluate her situation. She's a single mom living in Harlem. It's just not going to work out for her. So she decides that she's going to move back into her mom's home, who also lived in Harlem. And she worked 3 jobs. She carried on with her role as a teacher's assistant. And in the evenings, she would work as a healthcare worker. And she also took on the role of being a bus driver. And the funny thing is, she didn't even have to work this hard. I don't know if it was to keep her husband's legacy alive or what, but she really felt like she had to hold on to that vision that her and Melvin had for their children. So she really provided her kids with a decent upbringing. They were very well educated, they were very well behaved, spiritual children, and they always had like really nice things. And it's important to note that Sean, he was raised as a Roman Catholic, and he even served as an altar boy. So religion is something that has always been very important to him. So Janice enrolled Puffy into a program called the Fresh Air Fund, which is a non-profit youth development organization that allowed New York children from underserved communities to have these really cool, free summer experiences. And Sean went to Pennsylvania to live with an Amish family one summer, and he had the time of his life. He said that this really showed him how other people lived, and it's always something that he's really appreciated from his childhood. Sean did, however, miss his father growing up, and he looked up to other intelligent black men such as Martin Luther King and Muhammad Ali, but there was something missing, and he knew that it had something to do with his father, and he knew that there might be something more to his father's story. And Janice kind of took on the role of very actively trying to be both parents to him and doing what she could do to raise a man, you know. And an example of this is how she kind of taught him street smarts. Like, yes, he had a great education, he had nice clothes, but how was he handling himself in the world outside? So there is an example that he shared once in an Oprah interview about how his grandmother asked him to go to a shop to buy a pack of cigarettes. So on his way to the shop, he bumps into a group of kids who beat him up and they take the money from him. And he goes home and he does not have the cigarettes, obviously. And his mom is like, no, you go back out there and you get that money back. And he's like, he doesn't want to go back out there, obviously. He's all crying, he's beaten up. And even his grandma is like, no, he doesn't need to go and do anything, actually. And his mom is like, no, he does, because you can't let people treat you like that. You need to go back out there. As a matter of fact, you cannot come back home until you have that money. So he doesn't have a choice. So he goes out, he sees the kids, and he remembers getting into a massive fight, but he gets the money and he goes back home. And the lesson that he got from this, that Janice taught him over and over again, is that if someone hits you, you need to hit them back harder. So 12 was a really big year for Sean. His mom was finally able to move them out of her mother's place and they moved to Mount Vernon. And when he got there, Sean started thinking of ways to make money. And he decided that he was going to go up to the older kids who were paper boys in the neighborhood that were going to college. And he basically said, like, listen, if you let me do your paper routes for you, because he was too young to get his own paper routes at this point. He said, if you let me do your paper route for you, I'll send you half the money. So these kids were like, yeah, sure, that's cool. So he got his own paper route. So by the time he was 14, he was basically just buying his own clothes and he was always dripping in the latest fashion. So at 12, he even lost his virginity. And he says that he used to watch a lot of the show Midnight Blue and he just got in there, did his thing, and he reckons that he was even better than what he saw on TV. So yeah, that was a really big year for him. So during these years, he picks up the name Puff, which is a bit weird because he got that name because of his temper. He used to huff and puff quite a lot as a child, and therefore they started calling him Puffy. There is another version of the story which says that he was just a bit of a small guy for his age, and he used to walk up like this with his chest and his arms all puffed up, and hence the name Puffy. So it's up to you which version of that story you want to believe. So Puff, I guess we can call him Puff now, he went to an all-boys Catholic school called St. Michael's Academy and graduated in 1987. He had played football and his team also won the division title in 1986. He loved music, but he really had a knack for football. That was supposed to be his ticket to success. But he broke his leg in his final season and that plan went bust. So he enrolls into Howard University in Washington, D.C. to study business administration. And one of the first things that he does is he looks for a microfilm. So in case you're not sure, a microfilm reader is kind of like a computer that stores like scanned copies of things like articles and newspapers. That's what I personally used to use it for, and you would find it normally in a library. So it's like it's a scanner, it's a reader, but it had scanned copies of documents. I hope you really understand what I'm trying to say here. So he finds a microfilm reader and he searches the day that his father passed away. And the floodgates were open. Melvin had a little side hustle. Melvin Combs, he was a gangster. We've all heard the stories, we've seen the movies of Frank Lucas and Nicky Barnes, the most notorious black gangsters of their generation. Well, before those two took over, there was a kingpin called Jesus Christ. Willie Jesus Christ, J.C. Abrahams, had an organization that ran all of Harlem from about 1968 until 1973, and his right-hand man was Pretty Melvin Combs. So Pretty wasn't a small-time gangster who dealt with hand-to-hand transactions. He was a big-time player that worked for a huge organization. It's been said that these guys were moving about $5 million per year. I mean, this is back in the 60s, guys, the 60s and 70s. The guy was pushing major weight. He was JC's go-between for Frank Lucas and Nicky Barnes before they became the famous drug lords that we all know about today. So there's a documentary called Mr. Untouchable that was released in 2007. And there's a scene where Frank Lucas is on the phone with Nicky Barnes and he's like, "Oh, do you know who Puff Daddy is?" And Nicky Barnes is like, yeah, I know who Puff Daddy is. He's like, "Do you know whose boy that is?" And they both, I think, are like, "Oh, that's Melvin's boy." I mean, that's the kind of influence that Melvin had. Like, these guys, they're like in their 80s now and they still remember him from back in those days before they even became famous.
Me and Melvin Combs were good friends. We were good friends. We did a lot of business together. Of course, it was not a legal business, but we did a lot of business together. And I was sorry to see what happened to him. That shocked the hell out of me. Mm-hmm. And the guy who did it, I'm glad he got what he got. Mm-hmm. Okay, so.
And I know Melvin used to come to your club, the turntable, a lot.
Yes, he did. He come there all the time. Melvin was like a lady man. He come there all the time. He come to my club all the time. Yes, he did.
Can you say the name of your club?
The Lord Price Turntable.
So Melvin was arrested in November of 1971. He was caught in possession of 5 pounds of uncut China white and $50,000 in cash. And this is in November. In December, JC is seen with his girlfriend Margaret Logan and another person that worked for him, Walter Grant. And they basically walk into an apartment and they come out of their apartment and they're carrying like these huge heavy bags. So they're followed and arrested because they were indeed caught with a lot of illegal substances in their bags. So not long after that, JC's organization, the entire organization, is completely taken down. And the belief was that Melvin had turned into a government informant. Then in January 1972, while sitting in his car waiting for someone that he thought he was there to make a deal with, someone walks up to the car, and the belief is that this person was Walter Grant. And Sean has spoken out very publicly about the notion of his father being a government informant, and he's very heavily against that. But there are also some people who have come out who were from that area and knew these people, and they have kind of corroborated his story, saying that there's another version that says that whilst Melvin was in jail, his phones were all tapped. And obviously, if your phones are tapped, you're not giving away information freely. And he did have something to do with the downfall of JC's organization, but it wasn't voluntarily. Okay, so let's go back to little Sean, who's sitting in a library right now and has just read all of this about his father. And his mind starts racing. And he thinks about how his mom had covered the truth just so that he didn't have to grow up with the weight of all of this as a young man that's trying to navigate through life without a father. And then he also thinks that the streets that I grew up in, the streets that I used to play in as a child, my dad kind of ran those streets. And Melvin was only 33 years old when he died. So now, not only is he going to have to try and live up to Janice Combs, who put him through the school of hard knocks, now he also has to live up to being the son of pretty Melvin Combs. And his parents are the biggest hustlers that he's ever heard of. This changed everything for him. So now we're in the golden age of hip-hop. This was the name given to a period of mainstream hip-hop that was produced between the mid-1980s and the 1990s. This was characterized by diversity, quality, innovation, and influence. The African Americans were becoming more influential in the overall culture of America. And Puff, his mind was kind of like a sponge. He was looking at the socioeconomic factors and the influences that were affecting black men, and he was really taking it all in and thinking about how he can also capitalize on this new wave that was about to take over America. So Puff was interning at WBLS, a radio station. This was actually a requirement for his course, but he knew that what he really wanted to do was to be a part of the Uptown Records family. Uptown was the it place. It harnessed the youngest, the freshest, the coolest black talent that there was in New York City. So he also knew that Dwight Arrington Mayers, also known as Heavy D, lived in Mount Vernon, and he really wanted to meet him. The only problem was Heavy D was a massive celebrity at this point, and he knew that if he wanted to make an impression on this guy, he had to be on his A game. So there was a local pizza place that Heavy D liked to go and hang out in, and Puffy would go there and wait for him. And then one day, Heavy D showed up. So Puff walks straight up to him, he introduces himself, and he's just like, "Hey, I want to be your manager." So of course, Heavy D laughs at this, and he's like a little impressed by this boy. So he sits down with him and he chats to him. And by the end of it, Puff is like, "No, like, I'm being for real. Like, I would really love to be in the music industry. I would especially love to work with you and the people at Uptown Records. Is there any way that you can get me to have a meeting with Andre Harrell?" And then Heavy D was like, "Yeah, sure, I can do it." But then Heavy D pretty much forgot about it the minute he walked out of that pizza place. And then for 8 whole months, Puff consistently stalked him, trying to get him to make that phone call. I am talking like waiting outside of that pizza place almost every single day for him. And Puff knew where Heavy D lived, so he would literally just be like on the road outside his house, walking up and down, waiting for him to come out of his house or waiting to see him drive into his house. So one day he does finally see Heavy D standing outside his home. So then Puff walks up the driveway and he's like, "Hey man, like, come on, please, I really need you to make this phone call for me." And Heavy D's like, "Cheapers, like, you will not give up." So he takes out his phone, and back in those days they had like these massive cell phones, and he makes the phone call to Andre Harrell, and he books that meeting for Puffy to meet the Uptown family. So it took a while for the meeting to actually happen because Andre was also a really busy guy. I mean, Puff ended up packing up boxes at Uptown just so he could get his foot through the door. And when the meeting did eventually happen, Puffy was saying things to Andre like, "I would really love to be given the chance to learn from you. Like, you don't even need to pay me. My payment would just be the experience that I get from it being in an environment like this." And sure enough, Andre liked what he heard. So Puffy was hired and he had to be there 4 days a week. But he had to juggle this with his college, which was bound to be an issue. So Uptown Records was a magical place for him to be. It can be kind of described as a young urban Motown. It was a record label that was representing the future of the African American culture. The artists that were signed to the label included Heavy D and the Boys, Joe DeC, Guy, Bobby Brown, LB Sure, and Father MC. And you'd actually often see these people just hanging around the corridors or hanging out at the studio. It had been described as an incredible environment that was full of great energy, creativity, and there was always music just bumping in the corridors. And Puff's work ethic at this point. So Andre Harrell has said in an interview that he recalls the first task that he gave Puffy. He said that he asked him to go and collect some tapes that were in another studio that was in the Bronx. And that would be a 10-mile journey there and a 10-mile journey back. So he picks up a call just as Puffy was about to leave the office. And before he's even done with the call, Puffy was back in the office. And he asked him, like, "How the hell did you manage to get back so quickly?" And Puff was just like, "Oh, I ran." So Puff has said that he knew that this was it. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him. Being able to spend his days watching the man who owned one of the most successful record labels, it wasn't something that was common. And to add to that, he was surrounded by artists and celebrities almost every day in the office. He was studying everyone around him, especially Andre. The thing about Andre was that he was the type of guy that had a really clean image. Like, he almost was always wearing a suit. The type of guy that even on a casual day would be caught wearing a linen suit. And to Puff, there was something about that to him that just said that he's the type of person that can merge hip-hop, the R&B lifestyle with the champagne lifestyle. He's moving up in the world. He's a black man. He's wearing a suit, but he can still take it back to the hood. Here's a clip from an interview where Puffy describes what he learned from being an intern at Uptown.
You know, Uptown's kicking it. And my whole life changed because I got to see somebody that looked like me and was from the same neighborhoods, was extremely young, and that was actually doing it from behind the camera, because everybody's not a rapper, everybody's not a basketball player, you know, and there's people that's needed behind these different industries. And so I pursued Heavy to get to you, and so if it wasn't for Hev, you know, being on the label, me seeing that video, and then me chasing down Hev to get to you, I wouldn't have got a chance to on that first day, to be able to go and get you that tape. You know what I'm saying? So you know, even sitting here right now, you know what I'm saying, it's surreal that I'm being interviewed by like my mentor, you know what I'm saying? We only get a chance to like have like one mentor, one person that puts us on. So this is like a dream come true to do an interview that you're asking me questions and you get to say that I've done all these things, because I did a lot of these things to like make you feel proud, you know what I'm saying? Because you were the first one like to give me a chance, and to be, you know, sitting here and to have like made some of myself, and most importantly, to have made you proud, you know, is a feeling that I can't explain.
At the same time, Puff was developing a bit of a reputation of being a party boy. Like, he was in college partying up a storm almost every night, and he would throw the most ridiculous parties on his own. Everybody wanted to be at a Puffy party, and that meant that he was just constantly drinking and being around people and music and vibes and celebrities. Like, his life was pretty lit at this point. He wasn't stopping for anybody until Misa Hilton came into his life. So Misa was born on the 6th of January 1974. She is of Japanese, Jamaican, African, American heritage, and she grew up being obsessed with fashion and hip-hop from a young age. She recalls sitting in her room listening to music and imagining what the artist would be wearing in the songs. She had a very unique dress style, which was influenced by the New York streets, her diverse heritage, and hip-hop. She called it hip-hop glam. Puffy and Misa met through a childhood friend, and they bonded through their love of music, creativity, and most importantly, their drive to be a part of the whole scene. They became really close friends, and they started dating while Misa was about 17, and I think she was still in high school at this point. So one day, Puff's at work and the producer didn't show up. So he decides that he's going to use the studio and make a song. And he's got zero experience in producing at this point, by the way. So he just takes the beat from EPMD, You the Customer, and he put it on the vocals from the Jodeci song, Come and Talk to Me. And the remix was created. So he played it for Andre, and the song was released. And it's said that it made him over $2 million from a first-time producer. So Puff became the talent manager for Jodeci and Father MC to begin with. And he was doing an excellent job. And Misa was spending a lot of time with him. She would finish school, catch a train, and go straight to Uptown Records and spend the rest of the day with him. I think she even became his assistant. I don't know if it was official, but she's saying that it was official. But anyway, they're working on a music video with Jodeci for the song Gotta Love, and they wanted to do something different. And they came up with this idea. You see, back in those days, boy bands, especially boy bands that would sing ballads, they would be dressed up in all sorts of like really nice, you know, very formal clothes. But no, they were like, they want to make these guys look real street, like real street. I'm talking combat boots, hoodies, baseball caps. And they had to pitch that idea to Andre Harrell. Apparently, they were in a meeting with him for 2 hours. But eventually, they did manage to convince him, and they tried the look. And the look took off. Like, it became the thing. Every single boy band was doing it. Name it, they have that look. And it was all pioneered by Puffy and Misa in a studio. So Puffy really enjoyed going back to the hood and hanging out in the streets of Harlem. And there was one particular group of people that he'd hang out with, and these guys were called the Same Gang. He hung out with these people so much that they ended up recruiting him to be part of the gang. Yes, you heard me. Puffy was part of a gang. Yeah. But it wasn't that type of gang. They were kind of like more like a brotherhood. And they'd spend their time competing against other brotherhoods and playing basketball games and deciding who hosted the best parties. And Same Gang, they were the best in all of New York. They were led by a guy called D-Ferg, who's now more famous for being A$AP Ferg's dad. So D-Ferg was a renowned designer. He actually created the logo for Uptown Records and was involved in the creative process of the bands. So I can't emphasize to you how much Puff used to love a good party. And now he's also getting a bit moneyed up and he's becoming a really popular guy. He knows he's an excellent salesman. I mean, that's a skill he's been working on since he was 12 years old. But now he wants to start selling parties. He's an excellent hype man. He's got a great ear for music. He loves alcohol. He loves fashion. He loves bling. He knows exactly what sets him apart from other people. And he starts to think to himself, like, how do I make money out of all of this? I personally think that Puff has always known what the end game was for him. He's always known where all of this was going. And there were certain people who were in on the plan. A very select few people knew what he was doing. And an example of one of those people was Heavy D. I think that night when he met Heavy D at that pizza place, he told him what the plan was. And that's when he really started to rally people around him. And that's why people like Heavy D and Andre Harrell were so impressed with him. And now he's got D-Ferg from same gang in on that same plan. So he starts to host parties. I think on Mondays he would do these parties called Unsigned Hype. And on Wednesday nights he hosted parties that were called Daddy's House. The same gang would be there in every single one of these parties doing the security for him. I mean, how did he manage to get all of these people to rally around him and to help him so much if they didn't know that he would be doing what he's doing today? And even today, all those people, they're all still around him. I mean, Heavy D died. Okay, but we'll get back to that. Oh no, Andre was... We'll get back to that later. Bear with me for a moment. At this time, he also started hanging around a guy called Alpo Martinez. Alpo, he was known for being a very, very ruthless guy. I mean, people were worried about Puff, and they were thinking, like, he's not even the type of guy that you can even approach on the streets anymore. If you don't know who Alpo is, please watch Paid in Full. He deserves a whole video of his own. So Puffy's career, it was doing very well at this point. He was producing Jodeci's album Forever My Lady, which was a massive success. And he was also introduced to a young lady from Yonkers called Mary J. Blige. And he was basically given the project to start her off as an artist and introduce her to the world. And she did so well. Her album, What's the 411, was massive. But his little side hustle was about to give him a really, really big problem. On the 28th of December 1991, Puff and Heavy D were hosting a charity basketball game, and the guest list was pretty star-studded. I mean, you had Boyz II Men, Wu-Tang Clan, Mike Tyson, LL Cool J. In the early 90s, these guys were at the prime. So the venue could only hold about 1,000 people. There was a little issue that they had, and that issue was that nobody was keeping record of how many tickets were being sold. They only figured it out during the event when things were starting to get like really cozy. And to make things worse, the window upstairs had been broken and people were starting to enter through that window. So when LL Cool J and Mike Tyson showed up at the venue, all hell broke loose. There was a stampede. 21 people were injured and 9 people lost their lives that night. Puff's name was all over the news and he was held responsible for what happened as the person that organized the event, but no criminal charges were filed against him or Heavy D. However, he did receive 10 lawsuits from injured attendees and the families from those who were affected by the event. An MTV article reported that his settlements were estimated to be worth $750,000. So Puffy's reputation kind of remains unscathed from the whole event. In 1992, he lands on a mixtape that belongs to a young Christopher Wallace, who referred to himself as Biggie Smalls. And he's like, okay, this guy's cool, but that was it. And then not long after that, he sees him on the cover of Source magazine. And Misa, who was his assistant at this time, is like, come on, I mean, you have to at least give the boy a chance. So they organize a meeting and they meet at Sylvia's restaurant. And Biggie was apparently so nervous. He really wanted the deal. He couldn't even eat, and Puffy could see that he was really nervous. So after the meeting, Puffy was really impressed with this guy. Like, he knew that there was something to him. He had to be his manager. You see, Biggie didn't look like the typical celebrity, but when he spoke, he was the coolest dude ever. So Puff signed him to Uptown Records and immediately started working on his first studio track called Party and BS. And he also featured in a Heavy D and the Boys song. And in Long Island, there was another MC that was about to change Puffy's life. Craig Mack was an MC that had been grafting for a while and had multiple failed attempts at getting any recognition as an artist. And as a last resort, his manager, Alvin Toney, asked Puff if he could meet with Craig just as a favor for an old friend, and Puff agreed to do this. So they met at the back of Mega Club in Manhattan. Puff asked Mac to split a freestyle, which he did, and Puff was impressed. Right there and then, he offered Craig a feature in Mary J. Blige's song, You Don't Have to Worry. And this was Craig Mack's first commercially successful song. And to make things better in Puff's life at this point, he and Misa were expecting a baby. And he also was planning on starting his own kind of like branch from the Uptown Records. But Andre, who was on board with Puff's plan, he was getting a bit of pushback from the executive team. You see, they thought that Puffy was a bit too much, and they weren't sure about the lyrics in Biggie's album Ready to, so they were reluctant about funding the rest of it. And they were not on board for Puffy's vision for the company at all. Andre knew that Puffy was onto something and he could 100% make it work, but he'd never be able to do this if he stayed at Uptown. So Andre had to make the incredibly difficult decision. I mean, as a mentor, he had taught Puffy everything that he knew about the industry. Puffy was well connected. He was now a very experienced producer. He had a plan and he was young. So Andre had to make the decision to let him go. And Biggie's album was scrapped from Uptown Records.
But I knew it was time for him to grow. And the only way he could grow was if he was going to have the same kind of corporate conversations that I was subjected to. And then he would understand what he could and could not do. And the final straw for me was when MCA wanted me to not put out the Biggie Smalls album because they didn't like the subject matter, and they wanted me to tell him he's got to change his tone. And it wasn't up to me, I felt, to tell a generation what they could and could not do artistically. So I told Puff he needs to go and create his own opportunity. You red hot. I'm really letting you go so you could get rich.
So this was a massive curveball for Puff. He was absolutely gutted. He didn't understand why Andre, someone whom he saw as a father figure, why he'd do something like that to him. So he went into a really deep state of depression, and D-Ferg and the rest of the same gang, they were all really worried about him. So they kind of rallied around him and made sure that he was taken care of financially. And Puff remembers thinking at this point that the friends that he had in college, the same college that he dropped out of, they were all graduating during this time. So he had to pull himself together and carry on. And also, the people from the same gang, they had convinced him that he needed to carry on with his plans. He needed to start his own record label. The one that we all know today as Bad Boy Records. He called it that because he knew that he wanted to be disruptive. This would be the rebel child of the music industry. So he set out to look for some startup money. So there is a very widely known theory. This is my theory. And these are all allegations at this point. It's never been proven. But he got the money to start up Bad Boy from his friends who were involved in business that weren't exactly legal. Enter Anthony Wolf Jones. Wolf was born on the 20th of February 1965 in the Bronx, New York. His mom was a single parent who worked as a teacher, and Wolf was the eldest of 3 children. They had a relatively normal childhood. Like Puffy, education was a big deal in his home. But he grew up and he felt like he had to take on the role of being the man of the house. So he worked as a delivery guy whilst he was in college, and at some point he even did some construction work, but it was never enough money for him and his family. So he and his neighborhood friends formed a brotherhood called the Valley Mob. Now this brotherhood, it wasn't a brother, it was a really bad group of people. They were really terrible. They were bad people. So they got traction very quickly and became known for being a very dangerous group of guys. Wolf ended up finding himself in prison for conspiracy to commit murder, but he only served a few years of this. When he got out, he started a party business with his friends Buck and Al, which was called Butt Naked. And this company is said to have sponsored a lot of Puffy's events. According to Gene Deal, who was Puffy's bodyguard from same gang, the party business, it was just a front. What was really making the money was the white stuff that was being distributed in the background. So when Puffy got fired, he was looking for money to start up his company, and he asked his friends if they could help him. And these guys were more than happy to help. They actually came fully on board to make sure that they were protecting their investment. And just like that, Wolf became the muscle. Wolf took it upon himself to actually be the head of security and called his friends Lamont Riz Gurdy and Gene Deal to help him with that. These guys were known to graft. Everyone was terrified of them. Wolf and Puffy would work very closely together as a partnership. Puffy was the head. He was the brains of the business. He knew how to find people that were talented and turn them into stars. But in the music industry, there is a lot that happens in the background, and it's not for the faint of heart. Wolf was the person that took care of that. He was powerful. He had street smarts, and he was still very young, so he wanted to build a name for himself. So at this point, Usher, who was about 14 years old, was working on his first album with L.A. Reid, who owned LaFace Records. Usher seemed like he was struggling a bit, and L.A. sent him to live with Puff. Puff had something that was called Flavor Camp, and this is where artists were sent to sort of get their creative juices flowing. I don't know, it was kind of like a place that helped people build their confidence. And I don't know what they did with Usher, but it worked. By the time Puffy was done with him, Usher was a completely different person. So during this time, they filmed a video for Can You Get With It, which is in his debut album, and the video was filmed in LA. And in this video, Usher is sitting on top of a loaned car, a lowrider, a 1964 Chevy Impala, owned by a guy called P.Diddy. Wolf had introduced Puff to P.Diddy. P.Diddy is the leader of the Southside Crips, the biggest Crip set in Compton. Usher damaged the car paint when he was standing on the hood of the car dancing in the video, and as a gesture of goodwill, Puffy covers those damages. And like that, P.Diddy decided that he liked Puff, and now Puff had protection on the West Coast. They were buddies. Wolf knew what he was doing when he introduced Puff to Keefe D. You see, Wolf was gearing up for something. There was a war that was brewing in the background, and he was ready for it. So now Bad Boy Records is set up, and Puff got back in contact with Biggie and Craig Mack. But now he needed someone to distribute his music, and he contacts Clive Davis, the founder of Arista Records. So Clive wasn't really familiar with Puffy's work, but he took the meeting anyway. And when he met with Puff, Puff did his work as a salesman again, and he managed to convince Clive. Even more, he bought a tape that had the single Flavor in Your Ear by Craig Mack, which was to be his first single, and he played this for Clive. Clive was really in. Puff got himself a deal that was reportedly between $10 and $15 million, and Puff's own record label was well underway. And he had his first baby. Justin was born on the 30th of December 1993. I watched an interview that Misa did, and she talks about a night when she's on sort of a date night with Puffy at the Palladium. And Puffy's got a tape with him, and he gives it to the DJ, and it's the Flavor in Your Ear, the same song that he played for Clive. And the DJ plays the song, and Misa says that the crowd went absolutely mad. Like, it was almost bone chilling. And she just looked up at Puff, and he whispered in her ear, "You see that? They love that shit." That was the moment. Things were never going to be the same again. The following summer, Craig Mack's single Flavor in Your Ear was released for his upcoming debut album, which was named Project Funk the World. This was a massive hit. It peaked at number 9 on the Billboard 100 and became certified platinum, and it was nominated for a Grammy. The album was due to be released a couple of months after that, which would be a week after Biggie's album Ready to Die. Puff was on full-blown promotion mode for these two, and it seemed like they were a happy little family. But Biggie would later state in an interview that he didn't like Craig Mack. It was the weirdest thing. Craig had never said anything negative about him in public, but apparently Craig, he was very opinionated. One person that Biggie did get along with during this time is a guy called Tupac Shakur. Tupac had already established himself in the industry. He was working on his third studio album called Me Against the World, and Biggie was a big fan of his music. Puff had been friends with Puck for a while, and they were okay, but when Biggie and Puck met on the set of Poetic Justice, they really hit it off, and they kind of became best friends. Puck kind of took on the role of showing Biggie the ins and outs of the industry and helped him define his style as a rapper. Puck did, however, have some friends that were considered to be extremely dangerous. Even too dangerous for Biggie, who would hang out on the streets of Brooklyn and sell when he was a teenager. But Biggie warned Puck. In fact, Mike Tyson also warned Puck against these guys, and Puck didn't listen. That would be the beginning of the end for him, but more on that later. Biggie's album, Ready to Die, was released and it debuted number 15 in the Billboard 200, and it took 2 months for it to reach gold status, but in a year's time, it had reached 2 times platinum, and a lot of people contribute this to Craig Mack. Craig's album was released a week later and it peaked at number 21 in the Billboard 200 and was certified gold. The single Get Down also reached the top 40 and also achieved gold status. But you see, Flavor in Your Ear was the song during that time, and the remix for Flavor in Your Ear would also become a huge hit. In fact, Biggie opens the song, and that was done very tactically. Ready to had been out for 6 months and it hardly got any attention, but once Craig's remix was released, Biggie's sales just shot right back up. Puff had orchestrated the whole thing. The guy that Puff wanted in the front of Bad Boy was Biggie, not Craig Mack, but Craig was a guy that had the song at the time. Craig apparently had started pushing back in almost every creative idea that Puff had. He wanted him to take the route of being more of a ladies' man in his next album, but Craig disagreed on this. Meanwhile, Biggie was using all the beats that Puff was giving him. He was wearing all the clothes that Puff told him to wear. He was rapping about girls and the champagne life. He was really happy to cooperate with anything that Puff told him to do. And the thing that hit the final nail on the coffin for Craig was when he changed his manager and Puff did not like the choice. So Puff went to him and said, like, listen, you have to change your manager. And Craig was like, no, this is the guy for me now. And Puff was like, okay, if you want to continue working for Bad Boys, you are going to change your manager. Go back to the other guy. And Craig called his bluff. And just like that, he was released from his contract. Meanwhile, Tupac was going through a bit of a rough patch. You remember the friends that Biggie had warned him about? Well, to be more specific, there was a guy that went by the name Jock Agnant, also known as Haitian Jack. He was a member of a New York gang that was called the 18, and he was the New York celebrity gangster. Haitian Jack had been making a name for himself since the late 70s, and he was actually quite an influencer. He always had the latest drip and he had an extremely lavish lifestyle. This guy was a baller. He was really good friends and a very important client to Gianni Versace. I thought this was a rumor, but allegedly Madonna dated Tupac and she left Tupac to be with Haitian Jack. According to Haitian, he and Tupac met at a nightclub called the Octagon, and they were both in the same area, but Haitian had a table, well, that was bigger, and he had prettier girls with him, and he had bottles with him, and he just overall looked like he was having a better party. So Tupac asked the manager, like, hey, who's that guy? And the guy says, oh, that's Haitian Jack. Would you like me to introduce you to him? And he was like, yeah, sure. So the manager goes up to Haitian Jack. Well, he needs to ask permission first. And he says, well, Tupac would like to meet you. And Haitian Jack is like, he had no clue who Tupac was. And Tupac had actually been on the news and the media for another reason. He had recently come across a guy that looked like he was brutally attacked by two white guys. And these guys turned out to be dirty police. And Tupac pulled out his gun at them and I think he actually shot them. And the whole thing was dismissed because the two guys were up to no good. And even the guns that they had that night, they were stolen. So when the manager went up to Haitian Jack, he said, oh, Tupac's the guy that's been all over the media recently. He's the rapper that shot those cops. And Haitian was like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, tell him you can come over. So when he came over, Haitian bought him a drink and they basically just became really good drinking buddies. So in November 1993, Tupac was in a hotel room with a woman called Ayanna Jackson, Haitian Jack, his road manager, and another friend of theirs. And Tupac's version of the story is that he was with Ayanna and they went into a room and they had sexy times. And during this, Haitian and the other guys just walk in the room. And they also start to get a bit cozy with Ayanna. So Tupac thought this was a bit weird for him and he gets up and he leaves the room. He falls asleep on the couch, and not long after that, he is woken up by Ayanna just frantically screaming at him, asking him why he left her in the room and saying that they took advantage of her. That is Tupac's version of the story. I will not get into the version of Haitian Jack and what anybody else had to say about the incident, but yeah. So Ayanna ended up pressing SA charges on everybody, including Tupac, and Pac denied everything. He told the court that it was Haitian Jack and the other guys. And Haitian Jack would actually end up having his own trial. And this is where he would plead guilty for a lesser charge and actually walk out of the court as a free man.
Like, to what they think is that I represent lawlessness and the outlaw mentality, and I represent that thug mentality from the street. So they feel like if they can punish me, then it'll punish people who are not as brave as I am, who don't speak out against things like me, who not scared to walk through the streets with no bodyguards. So they need to put me in jail. These other guys, they don't have to put in jail because they can arrest them on smaller things. They can't arrest me on those small things. They got to frame me. They got to do things like this. They got to have, 30 charges, and none of them have to do with me. You know what I'm saying? How can you, if you really, while all these cameras are here, everybody goes something to grow on. How am I going to forcibly do anything to a girl after she did it to me consensually? And that's not something I'm making up. That's what they said. They said that. The girl came to court and said she did this, she did that. She called my hotel. It was good. She said that, not me. I'm starting to think I don't know which story to read. I don't know if this is, about, black and white and loud and quiet, or is it about me and this girl? Because if it's about me and this girl, come on, we shouldn't even be here. Make something like that up, because hell have no fury like a woman scorned. You know what I'm saying? I'm guilty of a lot of things. I'm guilty probably of being a male chauvinist pig. Okay, so she wasn't prepared for what happened to her. Where are those people that did this? They were all in the same hotel as me. They were all right in the same room with me. Why am I the only one in court right now? Why is the cameras all on me? The only way I've been practicing my whole life to live my life is to be responsible for what I do. I don't know how to be responsible for what every black male did. I don't know. I guess I am going to say that I'm a thug. That's because I came from the gutter and I'm still here. I'm not saying I'm a thug because I want to rob you and people and things. I'm a businessman.
And then enter Jimmy Henchman, a music producer who phones Tupac on the 30th of November 1994. So this is a year later. And he asks him if he could record a song with an artist that was unknown at the time. His name was Little Sean, and this would be taking place at Quad Studios. Tupac had been dragged through mud by this entire trial, and he was willing to do anything for money, so he agreed to go to Quad Studios that night and record the song. Little did he know that Jimmy Henchman was good friends with Haitian Jack. And that night, Puff and Andre Harrell were at Quad Studios hanging out with Jimmy Henchman. Biggie was also in the building, but he was on a different floor just doing his own thing with a group called Junior Mafia. So when Puck arrives at Quad Studio, he's at the entrance, and Little C's and Nino Brown, Biggie's people, they see him downstairs. So they make Biggie aware that his friend is downstairs, and Biggie is apparently ecstatic, and he asks them to go and meet with Tupac and bring him up to the studio. So when they get downstairs, Tupac and his crew, they're all on the ground, and there are guys standing over them with guns. And these guys force them to get back into the elevator. So they go upstairs and they tell Biggie what they just saw. Tupac had been shot 5 times, twice in the head, twice in the groin, and once in the left hand. All the jewelry he was wearing that night was stolen, and it was reportedly worth over $30,000. And apparently, Haitian Jack was seen in Atlanta the next day wearing it.
I tell people, you don't really know Pac, because Pac don't even know Pac. He got the right name. There's definitely 2 Pacs there. It's not one, it's 2 of them. Pac was all good when I was doing good things to him, until we caught that punk-ass case that was easily could have been beaten by both of us. The singer, he let his attorneys turn him against me, and that's the part that I'll never forgive him for, because I'm gonna ride it down with you, homie. I expect you to do the same. See, that's what I call a fair weather friend. Everything's good when everything's good, you know? But as soon as we catch a punk-ass case, right? You start telling me, oh, I can't talk to you, my attorneys. I'm like, what? You ain't who you say you are, man. You ain't no gangster.
So Biggie tries to go visit Tupac in the hospital, but Tupac absolutely refuses to see him, and he's completely shaken by the whole thing. It's clear to him that someone that was in the building that night had something to do with what happened to him, and he just wasn't sure who to trust. To make things worse, the very next day, Pac had to be in court for his essay hearing. So he makes it there, bandages and all, and he's found guilty of SA, and he's given 3 weeks to pay a $3 million bond to stay out of jail until his sentencing. He wasn't able to pay the $3 million bond, and he turned himself into the police and he was arrested. He would later be sentenced to 18 months to 4.5 years in prison. So Puff and Biggie, they absolutely did not want to be involved in anything to do with this situation. They didn't even for a moment underestimate Haitian. They knew that this guy, he was just extremely dangerous and he had a lot of power. And apparently, Tupac, there were people all over town who were trying to help him raise money to pay the bond. Allegedly, Jada Smith reached out to Biggie, and Biggie said that he didn't have the money to help. While Tupac was going through all of this, Biggie's fame was also growing astronomically. So it really didn't make sense to Pac. Like, why was Biggie not helping him? Pac would hear Biggie's interviews and he felt like Biggie wasn't even telling the truth about what happened that night. So now Biggie was a superstar at this point, and he was making all this music about having money and this crazy, luxurious life, but he couldn't even help a close friend of his when he needed him the most. And then the thing that really defined this whole thing for Pac, when Puff released Biggie's song, Who Hurt You? This song had apparently been written long before the incident. However, it was the timing that Pac had an issue with. Biggie was there that night. He's being asked about this in almost every interview. And then this song, it was seen as a diss record to Pac. And the Bad Boy team knew exactly how this would play out. So Pac lost his mind. He felt like he was being used, and he started going at Biggie and Puff on interviews, saying, "I'm not an idiot. Everything is pointing in their direction." They were involved in what happened to me that night. Puff and Biggie set me up. Puff and Biggie obviously denied everything, saying that he's confused, he's paranoid, and he's having like some sort of a manic episode that's due to PTSD.
The Tupac article had me pissed off, you know what I'm saying? Because first of all, he dissed my man, said my man turned his back on him, and I know for a fact that didn't happen, you know what I'm saying? And like the rumors that's spreading is on some tip like we set him up, you know what I'm saying? And that's crazy. I also understand that if you was to get shot 5 times, your mind is just completely spinning, you know what I'm saying? You're real confused about your situation. So it'll cause you to say things that you really don't mean.
So they carried on and they enjoyed the success of Biggie's reign. And then during this time, Biggie married Faith Evans, who was also one of the signees at Bad Boy Records. And then in March 1990, Pac released his 3rd studio album, Me Against the World, which debuted at #1 in the R&B and Top 100, making him the first person to ever have a song in the Billboard Top 10 whilst in prison. This would be his last album under Interscope Records. Meanwhile, there was another little record label in the West Coast that had some serious weight of its own, Death Row Records. Death Row was founded in 1991 by Suge Knight along with Dr. Dre, the DOC, and Dick Griffey. Suge Knight was absolutely ruthless. It wasn't a secret to anybody. He had this whole reputation of using intimidation and violence to get what he wanted. So Suge was friends with Wolf. And when Bad Boys was created, Wolf introduced Suge to Puffy because he thought that he would be a good connection to have in the industry. And they got along very well, up until Bad Boys became the opposition. And Wolf, he seems to have been ready for this. So the reason why this whole rivalry was going on was because if you're a hip-hop artist at the time and you were doing your thing and you were hot, you were either with Death Row or you were with Bad Boy. But there hadn't been any animosity until the 1995 Source Awards, when Suge went up on stage to accept the award for Best Motion Picture and Soundtrack, and he gives one of the most infamous speeches.
search. Know what's up with 213.
First of all, I'd like to thank God. Second of all, I'd like to thank my whole entire Death Row family on both sides, you know what I'm saying? I'd like to tell Tupac to keep his guards up. We ride with him. And one other thing I'd like to say, any artist out there want to be an artist and want to stay a star, and don't want to have to worry about the executive producer trying to be all in the videos, all on the record, dancing. Come to Death Row.
The crowd went mad, and Puff was just sitting there. He was completely taken back by this, and he thought to himself, well, what the hell is he doing? And then later that night, they were at the after party in a nightclub called The Tunnel, and Puff confronted Suge. Suge denied that the speech had anything to do with Puff, and he said that it was aimed. Then, not long after that incident, Jermaine Dupri had a birthday party in Atlanta at a club called the Platinum House. Puff was there with Wolf, and Suge was there with a guy named, well, his nickname was Big Jake. And there were some issues with Joe DeC and Mary J. Blige's publishing, who are, by the way, now signed to Death Row. And according to the people that were there that night, Suge was very, very angry and was seen slapping Puff and Jermaine Dupri. I mean, Suge, come on, how can you show up to someone's birthday party and stop smacking them around? But anyway, the owner of the place was like, guys, like, listen, I can't have this happening in my club. I have a room that you guys can use to speak, and you can handle this like gentlemen, please. And then all four of them went to the room, and before that, actually, Jake had been at the bar roughing up some guys that he was under the impression were part of Puff's crew that night. But that was before they went into the room. And then Puff and Suge get out of the room, they're smiling, and they're even seen hugging at some point. And they make their way out with their security guards following them, but then there's suddenly gunshots across the road. And apparently it's one of the guys that Jake had been fighting with. So this guy is shooting up in the sky. And then apparently this was just a distraction because another guy sneaks up behind Big Jake. And the guy points his weapon to Suge, but now Suge is standing next to Puff, and he quickly pulls Puff and he uses him as a shield. And then the guy just pulls down his weapon and he runs off. Suge goes right back to being angry with Puff because, Puff, these guys are clearly your friends. Like, what's up? And Puff, again, denies everything. And he even tries to comfort Suge as his friend lay on the floor losing his life. Oh yeah, there is another version of the story, and apparently it goes like this. They got out of the room, they went outside, and there was a lot of bickering. Puff gave the signal by taking a sip of a champagne bottle, and Wolf pulled out his weapon, and boom, that was it.
Well, I mean, that's what Puff said, that Suge came into the tunnel.
Yeah.
Came in the tunnel and told him he was looking for me.
No. That when he said at the Source Awards.
Oh, he was talking about me.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
No,
I guess we got an
which
answer.
side do you think is a little?
Come on, man, y'all know better than that. That's that people don't know is that beef between Puff and Suge started at my birthday party.
Okay, they were in the middle with Puff
The
and
middle
Suge?
of the street, Puff and Suge.
Wow.
Outside in Atlanta.
This is at your party.
Yeah.
Is it a calm conversation or they?
No, it's not a calm conversation.
Okay. But
it's
not just them.
It's a very hostile conversation.
Okay. And their crews is
Ain't no crew. I mean, Suge
wow.
has got one person. Puff got a crew. Suge got one dude with him. Okay. Right? And all I know is Puff started drinking his champagne while they was talking, and I guess somebody must have said something to him. And next thing I know, Wolf, rest in peace. He let off his and let off a couple shots and
So now it's safe to say that there was a beef, and thus marking the real beginning of the East Coast versus West Coast rivalry. And at this point, there wasn't anybody that hated Puff more than Suge and Puck, so they formed an alliance. Tupac applied for an appeal for his sentence, and Suge went on to pay Tupac's bond of $1.4 million, and he signed him to Death Row Records. Puck had been watching all of this unfold from prison, unable to do anything. But now he was out and he was in the middle of the action, and he was fuming. And a lot starts to happen from this point onwards. So after he gets released from prison, Tupac moves to LA to immediately start working on his next album, All Eyes on Me. And he even records a song with Biggie's wife, Faith, about 2 days later. And the name of the song is called Wonder Why They Call You B. Oh, okay. Right. And then he started telling people that he had slept with Faith.
Record CEO Suge Knight taunted Faith in front of MTV cameras, implying she and Tupac were intimately involved.
I just want to send a shout out to Faith. Hey, girl.
But anyway, so Puck joins the Peru Bloods, which were very much aligned with Suge Knight and Death Row. And they were ready to go at Bad Boy and the Southside Crips, which was their biggest rivalry. So Snoop Dogg decided that he wanted to film the video for a song called New York, New York, in New York. But the Bad Boy crew felt extremely disrespected by this move. So much so that Biggie called into the radio station Hot 97 on a show that was hosted by Funk Master Flex. And he told all the New York gangsters to pretty much rally up against Snoop, and he gave them the exact address to where Snoop was filming. And in less than an hour, Snoop's trailer was completely covered in holes, and Snoop immediately left New York. And then one of Puffy's producer friends was at a party, Mark Anthony Bell, and he bumps into Suge, and he is brutally attacked by Suge and some Death Row members who were apparently demanding for him to give them Puff's mom's address. Mark didn't want to cooperate with this, so they gave him a beating and took his belongings, which included a lot of very expensive jewelry. I mean, guys, it was popping. Like, things were insane during this time. You couldn't get away from these guys kind of taking shots at each other. And when Puff was asked about everything, he would say that, no, this is all being over-exaggerated. It's business as usual, and he wishes Suge and his team nothing but the best. And everyone else was just like really baffled because Tupac and Suge, they were constantly doing interviews and they were just openly dissing Bad Boy.
Do business. Ain't no other record company out there that sold as many records as we did. We outsold Bad Boy, LaFace, every black record label out there, we outsold them in 1 year. And I'm a convict and my homeboy just got off a murder case. So that tell you that it's pure talent, no hype. We don't got no all-American smiles. They don't even want to buy our record, but they gotta buy our record because we represent the street. So Death Row East is gonna be a personification of what we did on the West Side. We're gonna do it to the East Side, and we're gonna prove once and for all that all these people talking about an East Coast, West Coast war, they like the Judas was to Jesus. They only here to cause confusion. We here to bring money and to bring change. They here to cause confusion. All these weak rappers, Nas, all these suckers, they battling off of East and West like this is a game. This ain't no game. If this was chess, we'd be yelling checkmate 3 years ago because we've been beat these. It's not a game. We out here trying to help our people make money. We trying to get out of this 3-strike circle they got us in and start getting our papers on. So that's what we doing. By strength and numbers, we coming to the East Coast to prove there is no fear, there is no problem, there ain't nothing but opportunity. And the opportunity is overthrow the government y'all got right now, which is Bad Boy and Nas and all that bullshit, and we will bring a new government here that will feed every person in New York.
And when it looked like they couldn't be any more of a nuisance to Bad Boy, February 1996 happened. All Eyes on Me was released and it debuted at #1 on the US Billboard 200 and the US Top R&B Hip Hop Album charts. This album would go on to be certified diamond. And in this album, you will find what is arguably the most brutal diss track in hip hop history. Hit 'em up. There was a lot that was going on in Puff's life at this time, but making music, it seemed to have been the only thing that was really going well in his life. So it was all he really wanted to focus on. So he had found another way to sort of capitalize on music. And this was just based on purely reinventing songs. So he had a group of producers that worked for him called the Hitmen. And these guys, their role was to take hits that were already in circulation, remix them, and make them even bigger hits. So, if you don't know this by now, Puffy is the self-dubbed inventor of the remix. And this attracted a lot of artists. Like, pretty much every single R&B and hip hop artist in the mid 1990s came to Bad Boy for this. Like, people like Little Kim, TLC, Mariah Carey, Boyz II Men, SWV, and Aretha Franklin. As a result of all the madness that was going on in Puffy's life, him and Misa decided to go their separate ways. Misa had been really involved in helping Puffy start up his career, but they didn't have any time to figure out who they were as individuals, let alone who they were growing into as a couple. Misa's career, it was going very well at this point. She was styling artists such as Missy Elliott, Mary J. Blige, and Aaliyah. But she at least wanted to have that one person to settle down with. Puff didn't want any part of that life. However, there was another side of the story. Allegedly, Puff had been seeing a lady that he had met back in the day whilst working at Uptown. A woman that Misa was apparently good friends with, and she goes by the name Kim Porter. So going back to the East Coast versus West Coast feud, it wasn't a good look for Puff. I mean, at first he was probably thinking that it would generate sales and that would be it. And I don't think that he expected it to become something that so many people took so personally. For Suge and Pac, yeah, it was part of the whole thug life image, so they were kind of throwing fuel into the fire. For Puffy and Big, it was very far from the dapper businessman slash rapper image that they were trying to portray. But a very big misconception that the average person had about the situation was that Bad Boy was being bullied by Death Row. But that was very far from the truth. Bad Boy was just as dangerous. I mean, an example of this is one day when Puff was in LA with Riz and Wolf, and they were driving and they came across Suge and Pac, and they decided to follow them to a place that was called House of Blues. And Puff then straight up walks up to them and he asks them, like, hey, do we have any problems while we're in LA? And when they saw Riz was there, Suge and Pac didn't even want to answer him. I mean, Riz was really waiting for one of them to say something that would set him off. And he turns to Puff and he says, wait, they're not answering you. Ask them again. As a matter of fact, ask Suge because he's the guy that's pulling all the strings. And then Puff repeats himself. Hey, Suge, do we have any problems while we're in LA? You see, Riz was taunting Suge. And not just that, he was doing it in Suge's territory. And when Puff asked again, Suge politely turned around and said, no, you don't have a problem. Bad Boy, they were just as bad, if not worse. They were just able to know the difference between where to behave that way and where they should not behave that way. And they didn't want to attract any unwanted attention. So there was another incident that took place at a Foot Locker not long after that event, when 3 guys who were members of the Peru Bloods were attacked by a group of Southside Crips. The Bloods were completely outnumbered and got beaten up quite badly. This is when things start to get a little interesting because amongst the attackers, there was a guy called Orlando Anderson, also known as Baby Lane. Remember that name. So one of the Bloods that was being attacked, his name was Trayvon, and he was wearing a death row chain. And after they roughed him up, they took his chain. And when this got to Tupac, it infuriated him. He didn't see this as two gangs that were getting into a dispute. No, he saw this as the people that were affiliated to the Bad Boy crew attacking people that were affiliated with the Death Row crew and snatching his chain. Which brings us to the Soul Train Music Awards on March the 29th, 1996. Biggie had won the R&B Soul and Rap Song of the Year, and Tupac had won Best Rap Album. I mean, you'd assume that these guys would be in a terrific mood, but no. In the after party, they bumped into each other and things got a bit heated on both sides. But Death Row was asked to leave the building. So Suge and Pac actually went outside to wait for Biggie. And so when Biggie and left the event, they waited for their valet at the entrance of the building. And then suddenly, Suge and Pac just pull up in front of them and they start shouting like crazy. And they get out of their car and start charging towards Puff and Biggie. So Puff had Gene Deal there, who was his bodyguard. And he'd also hired a protection group that does these type of high-profile celebrity events. So they were sorted. But this completely shook Puff. He'd apparently taken off when he saw that were being pulled out. So when Puck got to his rented home that night, he asked the security team to go do sort of like a sweep around the premises to make sure that it was safe. I mean, I don't know, but I personally think that security should be doing that anyway, especially on a night like this. But anyway, once they confirmed that it was okay for him to go inside his house, they saw how badly this all affected him. For the first time, Puff was completely unhinged. Gene, who has done many interviews about that night, has said that Puff just couldn't take any more. That was it. And he said the following words, like, I'm a businessman. Something's got to change. I don't care if Pac has to, I don't care if Biggie has to, and I don't care if Suge goes to jail, but something has got to change. On the 7th of September 1996, Tupac was at the MGM Grand Casino in Las Vegas for the Mike Tyson and Brooke Seldon fight. Tupac was a huge fan of Mike Tyson, and he's seen backstage looking like he's absolutely pumped and ready to see his friend who just won his fight. And then you see Suge just go up to Pac and kind of tap him on the shoulder, and then they leave. On the way out of the casino, they're involved in an altercation, and there's actually surveillance footage of Pac and his friends walking up to a guy in the casino and attacking him, then fleeing the venue. The guy that he attacked was Baby Lane, one of the members of the Crips that attacked the guy in the Foot Locker. Baby Lane also happens to be Keefe D's nephew. Later that night, Puck and Suge were on their way to Club 662 where Puck was due to perform. But when they stopped at a traffic light, another car pulled up next to them. And Tupac unfortunately got hit a few times and Suge got grazed on the head by one of the bullets. Suge has spoken about that night, saying that Pac was very responsive. He was actually laughing about what had happened on their way to the hospital. Then when they made it to the hospital, Suge said he had another chat with Pac just before he left and it seemed like he was going to make it. However, 6 days later, Tupac struggled with respiratory failure, which led to a seizure that took his life.
Someone else asked you in the interview, and I thought the answer was interesting because I think it speaks to you and your generation a lot. Someone said, where do you see Tupac 10 years from now? You said, hey, I just want to be alive. That's real for you.
That's so real. I made a metamorphosis. I'm a new person today. Because I used to strongly and honestly, I feel like I could represent my generation so much because I honestly did not care whether I lived or died. But now, I cannot die with people thinking I'm a or a criminal. I can't leave until this shit straight. You know, I'm not suicidal. I can't go until y'all really know what time it is. And then after that, boom, it's all over. And we can see, you know, how this shit fall. But that's how it is. And the reason being is because if I can't live free, if I can't live with the same respect as the next man, I don't want to be here. Because God has cursed me to see what life should be like. If God wanted me to be this person and be happy here, he wouldn't let me feel so oppressed. He wouldn't let me feel so trampled on. You know what I'm saying? He wouldn't let me think the things I think. So I feel like I'm doing God's work.
So the world mourned Tupac, and Suge was actually on probation when all of this happened. So when the surveillance video from the casino incident was released, that's all the evidence that the state needed. And Suge was sent to jail for probation violation a month later. So it seemed like Puff's problems had all gone away. But this was far from over. Okay, so about 6 months later, the team go to LA to promote Biggie's album Life After Death, and his security thought that this was a terrible idea. They had received intel from an old friend of theirs, Cass Williams, a guy who used to run the streets, and he basically told Maze and Gene Deal that there was a price on Puff and Biggie's head. Also, Biggie and Puff had been receiving a lot of threats since Puck's death, saying that they should never set foot on the West Coast again. But apparently Biggie thought that this would be a great way to sort of signify that the war is over and to sort of extend an olive branch.
For Biggie to come to LA. Biggie wanted to go to LA. You know what I'm saying? He wanted to be there. A lot of people don't know this. I always tell people Big loved LA. He wanted to be there, but Puffy was working on No Way Out, and Big was just finishing up on Life After Death. So he was like, I'm just gonna come out there, help you finish up your album, put the finishing touches on my album, and we just gonna hang out there for a while. We ain't supposed to be in there as long as we was, but that was all Big idea. He wanted to stay there. He loved the vibe of LA. He wanted to be there.
So they completely disregard what everyone is saying, and not only do they disregard the advice, I mean, they went there and they settled there. They were there for the music video for Hypnotize. They were all over shooting it. And then Biggie was seen out getting tattoos with his friends. And then they went to the Soul Train Awards and they were just having a grand old time. Then the day after the Soul Train Awards, they attend an after party at the Patterson Automotive Museum. And what made the security team even more uncomfortable was the fact that not only had they downscaled on security that night, but at the party, there were quite a few members of the Bloods. They were just hanging out, looking at Puff and Biggie. And even Keefy D, who was there with the Crips that night, went up to Puff and Biggie's table and was like, hey, do you need any protection? And Puff just said to him, no, like, you and I, we don't need any extra attention on us right now. So let's keep a low profile. So that was it. So they enjoyed the rest of the night. And when they went outside to wait for their valet, Biggie and Puff got into separate cars. And they were followed by an off-duty cop. The entourage was about to take off and Gene Deal wanted to hang along the side of the car. But Puff wasn't having it. Again, he was saying that he just doesn't want this extra attention on him right now. There were police everywhere. And then Gene told their car driver to run the next 3 lights and apparently to make 3 turns so that they'd end up on the spot where they started, and that way they can see if anyone's following them. So the driver did exactly that. He ran the traffic lights. But unfortunately, Biggie's drivers, they didn't get the memo. So when they got to the traffic lights, their car stopped and a car pulled up next to them. Biggie was 24 years old, and his album, which was eerily named Life After Death, landed about 2 weeks after this. Nobody could actually believe what was going on. It was a scary time for everyone that was involved. Puff is said to have stayed in hiding for weeks, and he drank himself to oblivion almost every night. And he knew that the same people that did this to Biggie, they were also out to get him. And he blamed himself for everything that happened.
The way I was feeling when I did Raid was, I feel like I was already dead, you know what I'm saying? Just being in a situation where my mom's working, going to school, just leaving me open to dip and dab into different things, you know what I'm saying? It just left me kind of stuck. My mentality was more on some getting paper, not caring about nothing else, not caring about nothing, just wanting to get mines, you know? I got the record deal. Life after is the flip side of things, you know what I'm saying? I can't rhyme about being broke no more. I ain't broke. You know, I can't rhyme about hustling in the streets no more because I don't hustle no more, you know? So it's the life after. It's all that's over with now, you know what I'm saying? I ain't hungry no more, you know? Now it's a new beginning.
So after what happened to Biggie, people were very skeptical of Puff. After the details surrounding the incident came out, it seemed like there was something more to the story. So, yes, it was most likely that what happened to Biggie was sort of a response to what happened to Puck 6 months earlier. You see, Biggie wanted to start his own record label and DS Records. And in 1995, he sold all the rights for his music to Puff for $200,000. And his album, Life After Death, sold over 690 copies in the first week after his death, peaking at number 1 on the Billboard 200. And today, it's sold over 5.3 million albums. Ready to has sold over 3.8 million copies. Bad Boys has released 2 posthumous albums, which have sold over 3 million copies. Biggie has had a greatest hits album released by Bad Boy in 2007, which sold over 1 million copies. The song that Puff wrote as a tribute to Biggie, I'll Be Missing You, it went 3 times platinum. Keep in mind that today you earn royalties every time your song is streamed on Spotify, used in TikTok, or played on YouTube. Essentially, Puff has made a lot of money using Biggie's name since he was unalived. And what's even more crazy is that with the East Coast versus West Coast war, he was the only person that made it out of that situation without even so much as a scratch, when he was right there in the heart of all of it. Suge was gone, Puck was gone, and Biggie was gone. And the world has not been able to fully understand him as a person ever since then. Is he an extremely lucky man? Or is he a very, very evil and calculated individual? And now that he could just completely focus on the music, Bad Boy just took off. Puff was actually a rapper now, and he had this incredible energy, stage presence. Like, people couldn't get enough of him. Biggie had always encouraged him to rap, and he'd been working on his special project even before Biggie was unalived. He changed his name to Puffy, which was the name that Biggie apparently used to call him. And Bad Boys was thriving. What about us? What about you? What about me? So Total was a girl group that consisted of founding members Kima Raynor, Keisha Spivey, and Pamela Long. The 3 members signed with Bad Boy right at the beginning. They were actually the first female group that joined the label. So you know how Puffy would like to ease his artists in by making them feature in a song? Well, they made their first appearance by singing the hook on the Notorious B.I.G.'s debut single, Juicy. They were also featured on the original version and the hip-hop remix of the next single, One More Chance. Their debut self-titled album was released on January 13, 1996. The first single, Can't You See, first appeared on the soundtrack to the 1995 motion picture New Jersey Drive. The song featured the Notorious B.I.G. and peaked at number 13 on the Billboard 100, as well as number 2 on the R&B chart. Whilst recording their second album, they appeared on numerous top 10 singles, including LL Cool J's Lounging, Who Do You Love?, Foxy Brown's I Can't, and Mace's What You Want. Keisha Epps and Pamela Long sung the chorus to the hit song Hypnotized by the Notorious B.I.G. The group also released another single, the Missy Elliott and Timbaland track, What About Us, from the Soul Food soundtrack. Their follow-up album, Kima, Keisha, and Pam, debuted to strong reviews, sales, and was certified gold by the RIAA. The first single, another Missy Elliott collaboration, Trippin', reached the top 10 of the US Billboard Hot 100. Their next release, Sitting at Home, which made the top 10 of the Billboard 100 singles, was a hot track. This girl group was insane. If you're an R&B fan and you see the 90s and the noughties as the epitome of the genre, these girls, they were on top, and you know it.
What y'all wanna do?
The Lox were a hip-hop group from Yonkers, New York, and they were formed in 1994 and originally called themselves the Warlocks. The group is a trio which consisted of Chic Louch, Styles P, and Jadakiss. These guys began performing at local shows and producing their own demos, and very quickly became well known in their hometown. At some point, the trio connected with Jazzo and had a demo tape produced by him. One of their admirers was a fellow Yonkers native, Mary J. Blige, and after acquiring the demo tape from Jazzo, Mary J. Blige passed it on to Puffy, who signed them to a deal. The Lox gained national exposure in 1997 with an on-site collaboration on Puffy's single, It's All About the Benjamins. Shortly after gaining additional exposure with their multi-platinum tribute to Biggie, We'll Always Love You Big Papa, the trio later appeared on a multitude of hits. Mace's 24 Hours to Live, Mariah Carey's Honey, and Jennifer Lopez's Jenny from the Block. The group's debut album, Money, Power, and Respect, went platinum by 112 is an R&B group from Atlanta, Georgia. The group consisted of Michael Keith, Marvin Skandrick, Darren Jones, and Quinnis Parker, who met in high school. Known as Forte at the time, the group performed at talent shows and performed at churches and schools around Atlanta. Not long after that, they were discovered by a record production duo, Tim and Bob. Tim and Bob introduced them to their boss, who was able to secure them an audition with Puffy outside the Atlanta club 112 in Buckhead. They couldn't go in the club because they were underage, so that's why they had to perform outside. Puffy was impressed with the group and signed them with Bad Boy Records. The group then changed their name from Forte to 112, the name of the club where they auditioned for him. And soon after that, they found themselves living in New York, recording their debut album, 112. This was released in 1996, and the album eventually went double platinum. It featured the hits Only You and Cupid, both of which peaked at number 13 on the Hot 100 and number 3 and 2 on the R&B charts. The group then released their second and third album, Room 12, 1998, and Part 3 in 2001. The latter peaked at number 2 on the Billboard 200. Now, Puffy had another trick up his sleeve. A young rapper from Harlem that goes by the name Mason Maze Betha. Mace was born in Jacksonville, Florida, and moved to Harlem at a young age. However, when he moved to Harlem, he did find himself landing in trouble more often than not, so his mother moved him back to Jacksonville for a while. It's here where Mace truly developed as a religious man, and Mace states that in Jacksonville, everyone just goes to church on a Sunday. It's just the way of life over there. So he moved back to Harlem and he went to Manhattan Center High School, where he started to become a promising basketball player. However, Mace couldn't make it to a Division 1 college because he wasn't doing very well academically. So he ended up going to a Division 3 college, Purchase College, and he played basketball there for a while. But he realized that like this isn't going anywhere. So then he went to the second love, which was music. And he started doing mixtapes and performing at gigs where he went by the name Mace. He eventually dropped out of college at 18, and he, alongside 5 other mates, started the rap group Children of the Corn. The group was disbanded after one of its members tragically lost his lives, and we might need to do a separate video on Mace because he went through a lot growing up. So Mace's sister moved in with him, and one day she had a friend over, a guy called Kuda Love. And this guy happened to be Biggie's road manager at the time. The two would become really close, and Kuda believed that Mace was very talented as an artist, and he became his manager. Kuda managed to put money together so that he and Mace would go to a rap convention in Atlanta called the Jack the Rapper. It was there where Mace would meet Puffy on the dance floor, and he rapped for him. Puff was impressed, and he signed him within a week. When he joined Bad Boy, Puffy insisted that Mace change his name from Mace to Mace. And this is just one of the many changes, because Puff was like, I've already got hardcore rappers. I've got Jada Kiss, I've got the Locks, like, we're going to lose the name and we're going to clean you up. And Mace wasn't sure about this idea, but he went for it. And in Puffy fashion, Mace was firstly featured in one of another Bad Boy artist's song. So Puffy could figure out if he actually had the star factor. And he was featured on the remix of the 112 track Only You in 1996. And the world fell in love with Mace. Like, he was so gorgeous with that smile and those dimples, and he was just extremely talented as well. Like, he had this like really chilled back style of rapping that would draw you in, and you would actually hang on to every word that he was saying. So come 1997, when Puff was ready to release his album, he released the first single, Been Around the World, right before Biggie was unalived. And the song was pretty cool. It was really nice. It featured Mace, and they both had like this really cool, laid back style of rapping that we didn't even realize that we needed. But boom, there it was. So we were like, okay. And it's in this video that we see Puff dancing with Jennifer Lopez, but more on that later. And then after Biggie was unalived, he released the tribute song, I'll Be Missing You. And this song was very well received. It was beautiful. You've got Faith singing her heart out for her husband. You've got 112 on the harmonies. And then the part that really captured me, it was the part at the end when he breaks down and he just starts dancing. It was so refreshing. And he really caught our hearts as someone who was mourning a friend. So he really had everyone's attention now. Like, we wanted to see more of him. And then Can Nobody Hold Me Down was released, which was a really cool song with Mace again. And you see these two guys, like, literally with the coolest, most laid back style. And we were like, you guys are certified cool. Like, this is it. It doesn't get any hotter than this. But then they released More Money, More Problems. Oh my goodness. They were the best, hands down. And in all these songs, Mace is right next to him with his calm energy. And by the end of the year, the album had gone quadruple platinum. And in 1998, it won the Grammy for the best rap album. It seemed like this was a happy ending and there'd be nothing more to the story. But this is where his story actually really starts. This is when he unleashed himself to the world. And we'll speak about this more on part 2. I'll see you there.